thing that I started to do with patch 107 is that I started to use a whole bunch of weapons that I normally would not find myself using. Weapons that normally would be outclassed by some better weapons. Speaking of which, we have the Regalia of Eochaid. Now, the Regalia of Eochaid is one of the coolest looking weapons in the entire game. One of the coolest looking straight swords in the entire game. Thing is that nobody uses the Regalia of Eochaid because it's just downright better to use the Marae Executioner Greatsword, which I have right here, the Marae Executioner Greatsword. This thing is just overall a better weapon, and it has a better scaling. It also has more damage. All in all, if you want to use the weapon skill of the weapon, which is this one, you could definitely do it. One thing that nobody liked about this weapon before is that it leaves you with your ass wide spread open for the enemy to be able to take a hit on you and stick their thing as deep as it can go into you, because you were just right here waiting for you with your cheeks open. So all in all, it was just not good. But I do realize that I did used to use this weapon with this talisman, with the Rotten Wing Sword insignia, which increases your damage when you do successive attacks. Now with patch 107, what they did is that you can now use this thing and then get away as soon as possible for you to be able to be safe. The weapon skill in itself, even if you charge it up, it's really damaging, but it was just the risk of this thing was just not worth it. One thing that it actually is worth it is that it increases your damage by a percentage. So I realized that I was using it increases your damage by a percentage for every single thing. Spells, weapon arts, you name it. It increases the damage by a huge percentage. And normally you would have to build that thing like this, attacking regular enemies like this. And your meter, as you can see it right there, I just turned red, and you would have to keep on the assault for the enemies. It has 3 thresholds, and for you to be able to reach the final threshold, you would have to use either very fast weapons or just not get hit at all to interrupt yourself. But with this thing, now I have the maximum. I just lost it. But with this thing, now I just lost it again. But with this thing, now I have the maximum threshold that I can possibly have with my talisman. I can get away from enemies' danger and then charge my sword of Night and Flame and deal a whole bunch of damage to the enemies. And these are just regular basic enemies, but there's going to be footage in the background. So one of the deadliest combos that you can possibly make right now, thanks to the Regalia of Eochaid, is basically that. Increase your potential damage by using that talisman, but also one thing is that the Sword of Night and Flame on itself, it really is already high damaging. It's a really high damaging weapon. So every time you start an encounter, every time you are going to fight something, all you have to do is start the encounter with your Regalia of Eochaid and then switch to your dual-handed swords. And with your dual-handed swords, you are able to keep on the assault and get as much damage as possible from this Rotten Winged Sword insignia. And yeah, it really is the damage that you get from that beautiful Sword of Night and Flame with this build is just something out of this world. Again, I would never find myself using this thing prior to this patch, because when you use this specific weapon skill, you are way too open, and now you can cancel it, you can get away from the enemy attack animation, and you can just spam this thing and be able to be as efficient as possible. Stats that we can use with a build like this. These are basically the stats that you would use with a build like this. I know that it is a very demanding stats. It is a very hungry stat build. One thing that you need to have in mind is that the Regalia of Eochaid is not going to scale the damage of the weapon, neither with Fate nor Intelligence. So you could say that you are sending those points to waste, but if in reality, if we actually speak with facts, you do need to have in mind that the Sword of Night and Flame on itself with this kind of build it really is broken enough. It really is strong enough. And what you're basically doing is that you're increasing that already broken damage that the Sword of Night and Flame. Think of the Regalia of Eochaid with this weapon as a side kick for for the Sword of Night and Flame. The Sword of Night and Flame is Batman, and the Regalia of Eochaid, it's robbing. The Sword of Night and Flame can work perfectly fine on itself, but when it has Robin, oh boy, then that's where it starts to really shine. So, as for the talismans, there's a huge selections of talismans that we can... Just let me get rid of this little guy that we have right here. You know what? I do not know why am I struggling that much if I had the... If I have the... Yeah, I do. If I do have the Regalia of Eochaid right here. And it looks amazing. Side plus. Anyways, as for the talismans that we can use with this build, the Shadow of Alexander. The Shadow of Alexander, that is going to increase the skill damage, both of the Regalia of Eochaid. Remember, that is not your first source of damage, but if you can increase your source of damage by this thing, then by all means do so. You are very much welcome to. Rotten Wing Sword Insignia. The Rotten Wing Sword Insignia is basically the bread and butter for the build. For you to be able to properly increase the damage of the Sword of Night and Flame, increase that huge extra chunk of amount of percentage, thanks to the Regalia of Eochaid, you can use the Rotten Wing Insignia, which is going to increase your damage with successive attacks. And then another one that we could probably use is the Fire Scorpion Charm, which increases the Sword of Night and Flame special attack for this one right here. Another one, this is always, all in all, just amazing. The Green Turtle Talisman. I always like to use this thing. One thing that you might consider wanting to use with this build is the Radagon Soul Seal, because at the end of the day, this is a very, very hungry stat build, so you are going to be wasting too much stats and you're not going to be able to even reach that maximum soft cap for Intelligence and Fate. So I do advise for you to use either Radagon Soul Seal, Star Scourge, Heirloom, and any of the heirlooms that basically give you stats. As many stats that you can get for this build, that is going to be amazing. That is always going to be nice. And yeah, I guess that pretty much covers everything. Talisman speaking, I always like to have the Earth's Favor +2, because that's extra weight and stamina and health. And the Great Jarl Arsenal, it's just one of my favorites. Although you do not need it that much with this build, because let me see. No, you do not need it with this build, because as you can see, if you take away nothing, you're going to be able to roll real fast, because the Regalia of Eochaid and the Sword of Night and Flame, they are not really that weighty. And the Sacred Steel Dagger with Golden Bow, you're not going to be needing that thing with this build, because at the end of the day, you do have enough faith to be able to properly use the Golden Bow on itself. So there is that. And then the final thing that you should find yourself using with this build is the Flask of Wondrous Physics. The Flask of Wondrous Physics that you are going to be using with this build is the Magic Shrouding Crackthea and the Flame Shrouding Crackthea. These are both going to increase the total damage output that you are going to be able to deal with your Sword of Night and Flame. Remember, the real shiny in this build is going to be the Sword of Night and Flame, but at the end of the day, the Regalia of Eochaid is going to be increasing that amount of damage, skyrocket the potential amount of damage that you are going to have with this build. So again, just to wrap up the video and to wrap up the build, what you want to do with this kind of build is pop up your Flask of Wondrous Physique, and if you so decide to, then you can very much do so. Use a Golden Bow with your dagger. This is a Golden Bow, and this is also going to increase the Sword of Night and Flame damage. And then after that, each fight you're going to be starting it with the Regalia of Eochaid, that is going to be increasing that threshold amount of damage by a percentage. And now that you have that percentage, you do want to take the time to cast your spell, which is going to cause the enemies to melt down into oblivion. It really is just so strong, and I cannot believe how did I overlook this while I was doing my very first regular Sword of Light and Flame build? This is just an amazing combo, and it is an amazing combo as well, because again, like I stated, you can basically start every single fight like this right here, then get away, switch that to your dual wielding weapons, and that is also going to be deadly as well, and that's going to be keeping that percentage of build up damage that you have thanks to the Rotten Windsword insignia. So yeah, this is really amazing, really an amazing game. Build. Yeah, you get the idea. That being said, remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel before you close the door, and remember that no one has told you today that you're a gorgeous and beautiful person. You are indeed a gorgeous and beautiful person. Have a beautiful day, and I'll be seeing you goddamn gorgeous and beautiful people in the next one. Goodbye!